almost about that time. Right about now.
Right about now. Funk, bunk, 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 soul brother.
Okay, Courtney Kocak, welcome to the Right About Now podcast.
Thank you for having me.
I'm so excited to talk to you. Last time we spoke, I was on your podcast, which was thrilling. This is very exciting to kind of do a cross podcasting effort. I love doing this. As I mentioned in my introduction, you have a great podcast about writing called The Bleeders, and I really recommend everybody go and listen to that, especially if you like my podcast, you'll like hers even more. But
There, that's how you do it.
because
flattery.
let's get a little bit into your background before we get into what you're up to these days. Tell us how you got into writing in the first place.
Oh man, it was a long journey. So I started out as an actor. I grew up in a little town in Minnesota, and I think that was just like the most obvious part of storytelling to me was like the people on the stage or the people on TV. And so I thought that's what I wanted to do for a long time. And that's a rough life. I would not wish that on anyone.
I could not agree more. I also went through an acting
Oh,
phase.
were you an actor too?
In college, I did a lot of acting. I thought I wanted to be an actor and took a few classes in New York when I got there, and was just like, I can't do this. It's just not a life that I can
Yeah,
do.
I'm a little bit more of a masochist because I lasted like years until I was like, seriously, this is gonna be your life? You hate auditioning. I hated auditioning. So I was like, that's a non-starter
Yeah,
to
that's
be
true.
an
You
actor.
sort of have to be comfortable with that part of it.
Yeah. I think eventually I found writing because I wanted to write roles for myself because it's dismal, what women have to choose from. So, but then I was like, oh, this is the thing. And ironically, I think if I would have been an actor that also wrote, I would have been much happier and like able to tolerate the auditioning and stuff like that. But
right. So you're writing at first. You were writing sort of like you said, like monologues or parts that for yourself. When did you start? Then you started kind of getting into journalism and writing a lot about sex specifically. I'm very interested in that part of your career because writing about sex, another thing we have in common.
yes,
but I think you've gone
Jake.
a lot. Jake,
have you told your audience about Jake?
They're familiar with. There was a moment when I was Jake at Glamour and the guy guru at Cosmo. And I've also just in general written about sex from a guy's perspective, which is very different oftentimes than writing about sex from a woman's perspective. But when did you, and first of all, why were you interested in that beat? And tell me a little bit about how you were able to express that in your career.
Yeah, all the journalism has just come from like my natural curiosity about whatever the subject is that I wanted to cover. And the sex stuff started because I I was so bad at going through breakups in my 20s. I would just be devastated by men I really should have just easily let go.
Bad boys? Were they bad boys?
No, they weren't really bad boys at that point. My first love was a bad boy catastrophe, but after that they were nice boys, but I would just think I was so in love with them and that they were the only person for me ever, and like I was just too young and dumb to know what the possibilities were. So anyway, I would be heartbroken for, like the better part of a year and be not fun to be around. And anyway, I wound up having so many conversations with other people about like, did you ever get back with your partner? And just like asking them really intimate things about their own loves lives as I was trying to get over this, just like talking to random. And then eventually I was like, oh, I should start a podcast with my friend. We were online dating. We were frustrated on Tinder, which was like a new experience for me as a single person when I finally was like dedicated to getting over these people. And that's how Private Parts Unknown started as Reality Bites, a different podcast in 2016 out of that.
Yeah. And so Private Parts Unknown is, how do you explain what that podcast is to people?
It's about love and sexuality around the world. Unfortunately, I've been grounded in LA for
Because of
too
COVID?
long.
Yeah.
COVID kind of put a wrench in things, but I am working on a book proposal, and hopefully that will inspire a whole bunch of new international travel that I can also do on the podcast.
So the idea is you explore different the culture around sex in different parts of the world, and the taboos and the non-taboos.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about that.
So the first trip was to Helsinki. I just found this residency, my Helsinki residency. Their city does this awesome thing where they host influencers and journalists and creators. And it didn't seem like they'd had a podcaster. So I applied for Reality Bites, and we kind of knew I was co hosting with a friend at the time. And we knew we wanted to change, like widen the scope a little bit. So it just felt like the same thing other people are doing, kind of, you know, interviewing the same people as other comedians in LA. So we were like, what can we do to make this different and more interesting for ourselves too? And I had taken this trip to Paris the previous year, and we'd recorded part of it for the podcast at that point, not thinking that we were going to do anything travel wise. And I was like, oh, I would love to recreate that and like do that more. And Anthony Bourdain was in his heyday, and so we were like, yes, Private Parts Unknown, the perfect kind of, instead of exploring food through that lens that he did, we're gonna do sex. And that's how it started. And we wound up getting that residency. So we had a week in Helsinki that was funded for us, which was an incredible experience. So we paid for this videographer, Micah, to come with us. Oh my God. I would love to go through that video again now, having a lot more distance. But yeah, we interviewed a bunch of, I think 10, I can't remember exactly, but 10-ish local people, like half of the first gay couple to get married in Finland, and um Mina Parika, who's like a shoe designer, a young 30-something single mom. We just tried to get a wide spectrum of people. One of the therapists from like the Finnish version of one of those relationship shows, not 90 Day Fiance, but one of those type of shows. So he was really interesting, and he talked about masculinity and how that's going through a shift because Finland is such a feminist country. So anyway, that whole series was fascinating. So then we wound up going to Mexico City, and right before the pandemic, we went to Tokyo, which was a bucket list trip, and ended in us getting happy ending massages.
Okay, you were leading to that part. So I want to talk
I
about
didn't even know we were going there.
yeah.
Okay.
Do you mind if we go there?
Yeah, let's go there.
So I spent a lot of time in Tokyo. I lived in Tokyo. I don't know if we ever mentioned this, if I ever mentioned this to you, but I lived in Japan.
I don't know. No.
Yeah. And I was back there recently. And yeah, I was not aware that women could get happy ending massages in Japan. And by the way, if anybody has any kids listening to this, it might be the time when you turn off the turn off the podcast. But for all my adult listeners, so tell me a little bit about how what you discovered when you went to Japan. Japan is definitely a strange place sexually. The people are so and I don't mean to generalize here, but very polite, non-confrontational, kind of like shy, and yet their sexual
They live double
life
lives.
is a double life. There's love hotels, which are these special like hotels you can go to have sex with your wife or mistress.
Well, I think that's a function of just like they're more likely to live with
Their parents and stuff.
family, and yeah, it's just kind of different in that way. And so people are just going there to like have sex with their
True,
partner.
but the love hotels aren't like just hotels. Like they have like, you know, bottomless chairs and, you know, vibrating beds, and they have a lot of like they're set up for like sexy time. But anyway, tell me about your experience going to Japan. How did you guys find out about that, and then what happened?
Well, that was a total mistake. We are not mistake, but that just happened basically because we were interviewing a 30-something reporter, like a Japanese chick, like about our age. And at the end of our interview with her, she was like, I think she basically dared us to get these happy ending massages, which we'd previously been talking to her in the interview about the 5 levels of sex and intimacy work in Japan. And that was one of our big things that we were covering on that trip. And so we were definitely interested to learn about this. It's called home delivery health,
Okay.
which accurate, I
I
think.
kind of like it. Bring it
Yeah. Subtle. And what's so funny is our first interviews were with Joe and Yuki. And Yuki is a sex worker, and she said, "Oh, I've been to this hotel before for work where we were staying." And then by the end, after we got dared, we were having happy ending massages in that very same hotel, and we were like, "Oh, we're the business guys."
Yeah.
Oh, that's us. Yeah, but it was a really interesting experience because I think I don't know. I'm not a man, so I can't even presume, but for a woman to have your pleasure, so like it's the job. That's the job you're making money for.
Mm.
That's so unusual to have it taken that seriously, that it was just a mind-blowing experience for that. Just that. But
What do you
above
mean
that,
for you? You mean for you to pay to have that pleasure?
well, yeah, obviously that's unique, but just to have your pleasure in any relationship. My partner loves me so much. Is my pleasure more important than his?
Mm, right.
Rarely.
Right. Right.
Like
So
that's not
prioritizing your pleasure. Right.
how we have sex usually, but I think women perhaps are more um subservient in the like the hierarchy of pleasure. Usually. And in this situation, it was so not that, um, that was crazy. And then it also just, I'm in a monogamous relationship. I've been with my partner for almost 7 years, which is crazy. It just flew by. And, but we're mostly monogamous. And this is, I feel like, an exception, but I texted him and he was just so cool about it that
Just
it
fine with
made
it.
me love him more. Yeah, it was very weird. And I'm not, necessarily trying to be in an open relationship or anything like that, but it just expanded my mind and just thinking about, I don't know, love and the restrictions we put on people. And sometimes I don't know, like that
Now,
was such a little gift.
yeah, and he was cool with it. It was for work.
It
Uh,
was for work. It was research.
it was
Truly.
research and development. Um, but now, for those who might not be familiar with a happy ending, like what we're even talking about here, this is a massage that ends with, let's say, an orgasm, basically.
Getting jerked off.
Yeah.
Not necessarily an orgasm.
Yeah, but there is touching in areas in private parts unknown.
Yes, exactly.
And this particular happy ending massage you had, did it come from a man or from a woman?
Oh, it was from a man. It was
Okay,
from a
that's what I.
man who um was so cute. I mean, he looked like just like the ideal K-pop band boy,
Handsome. Yeah.
like, yes, but like with the gear too, like the style, you know. Um it made me feel very hip, okay, being with this young man.
And it starts off as just a massage, relaxing.
Yeah. I was late to my happy ending massage because we had been at an S&M bar prior, and
Can I have your life? Your life is fascinating. Okay, so you'd been to a Japanese S&M bar, which I
well, again, we had to go for research,
yeah,
so
there was lots of stuff going on.
it's a very hard job. Always working.
I will admit that I was taken by my company to a live sex show in Japan. So there is definitely,
Oh,
yeah, we'll
what
talk about
company?
that. The company of my friends. No,
Yeah.
it was the Mumba show. Sorry, I'm probably going to get people in trouble. It was the Japanese education uh like they're like the middle school education, association, whatever. I mean, it's a government agency, but we went on a
Wait,
trip to
what? Middle
Hokkaido.
school?
So
What's going on?
I worked for a Japanese, well, my first job out of college was working for the government. Basically, it was called the JET program, Japanese Exchange and Teaching Program, and you go and you teach in middle schools or high schools, whatever, in a certain area, kind of like a Peace Corps type of thing. They sent me this prefecture called Chiba, which is where the airport is. And I was in this little kind of rural city. And yeah, like I was like one of the first foreigners that most of the people in this community ever had any contact with. So they kind of treated me almost like a celebrity. And
But you weren't going with your students, were you?
oh God, no, 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 no. So
Okay.
my sort of organization has nothing to do with my students. This thing. This was like we went on a trip to Hokkaido, which is northern Japan, and it was like a business trip. It was like Japanese business trips are weird because you like when they're not weird, they're actually awesome. You stay in these hotels where everybody's kind of together and you do all these things together. And then they're like, John, we're gonna go out tonight. We're gonna do lots of different things. And we went and drank, and all of a sudden I'm sitting in this place and I have no idea what's going on because nobody really speaks English. And these two people get up on stage and start having sex. And I'm like, okay, I'm at a live sex show. I have to say it was one of the most unerotic things I've ever seen. But it was what was so
Were
weird.
they intentionally performing for you?
Yeah,
It
yeah,
was
they
a
were.
show.
It was a show. And what was so crazy about it is kind of like the calmness of the people that I went with, like that it was just normal. And they kept kind of looking at me for my reaction. I'm like, like drinking, but it
Were
was
you-
kind of like, I was like, this is interesting. Like that you would think I would be interested in this.
How long did they have sex for?
God, way too long for my taste. It was like all sorts of different positions. Like now we're gonna do this position. Like
Oh
everybody's just
my
sitting there.
God.
It's not even like a show. It's like everybody's like drinking their drinks. It was like tables. It was like a burlesque almost kind of thing.
They
It was
should have
like,
done Shibari. Shibari is very hot.
what's
You
shibari?
could watch that, the rope stuff.
Oh, right. They might
I
have.
feel like that's like very erotic
It's
to
more
watch.
erotic. Like this was kind of like just two people having sex. And it was kind of like, okay. I mean, they were obviously actors. But it wasn't like, yeah, it was strange. It was like as if you were watching a burlesque like striptease, but it was people having sex. All right. I want to go back. How did this become about my true confession that I went to a live sex show? I don't even know if I've ever told my wife that. I have told her that. But so you
I
go to
know. Are your kids going to do the outro for this podcast?
yeah, no, the kids are off of the outro. Sorry, I just lost like 90% of my listeners. I only went. I didn't participate in the live sex show.
Oh, no judgment
No
on the sex
judgment
show.
here.
It just
I
happened in
was
front
asked
of
to
you.
participate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
No,
Wow.
I was not. But anyway, so you go to this guy. He's very handsome K-pop, or not even handsome, but he's like a cool K-pop guy, probably handsome.
Yeah,
And
he's handsome. He was like
you
a
were
top
late. You showed up late.
he was like a top rated on the site.
You made
They were
sure to
like,
get the
who do you
best.
want? And we were like, whatever, just send your
Best.
best and brightest. And they did.
And were you guys in the same room? No.
Me and my friend.
Yeah.
No.
Okay.
So I was running late. Oh, this is what I was saying. We were at the S&M club, so I was running late to my appointment. You shower at the beginning of your appointment. It was just him and I. She was down in the lobby where the other person waits, I guess, because that's where I waited too. And then he does a little massaging after the shower. We each take this shower, which I very much appreciate that cleanliness. The massage was weak. If it was a real massage, I would be like, you stole my money, but that wasn't the point of it at all. So I was just enjoying like being touched. And no one really warned me that at one point it was like, is he going down on me? Like no one was, so there were some things that I had to kind of like felt like I should nip in the bud. Like I didn't get necessarily full oral permission, okay?
Yeah. See, oh wow, that's more than I thought because
Yeah,
it's not
I got some
manual.
licks and I had to be like, okay, come here.
You weren't you were not sure about that.
Yeah, it just, that wasn't what I had thought
Yeah.
going into it.
That was
So it
way more of a
wasn't. I feel like this man would have just had sex with me for free because he was offering, and I was like, no,
you're cool.
you're just, yeah, just do the regular, whatever you do with the old ladies.
So you wrote about this, and how long did it last? Was it like an hour session?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was an hour or like, a therapist hour, 50 minutes kind of deal, whatever. And because I was late for mine, my friend was definitely not late for hers. She was like, okay, I'm ready. And her guy was up, eventually there was just a knock on the door from her guy, which put an end to things. And then
Right.
it was, yeah.
And
Return.
did you find it relaxing and stimulating and a good experience sexually, or just was it more of a curiosity?
I found it very erotic. Like it was a great fantasy kind of thing. And even in the moment, like I was like, oh, this is a great fantasy, even though it was really happening. But it was like a full moon outside of the hotel. We're in Tokyo, like one of the best cities on the planet. Um, there's this stranger that's like doing sexual things with me. My partner is so trusting that he gave me permission to do this. Like my friend is there, like they're, but it's not your standard sexual. It's not like, like I make myself come more by myself with my vibrator, just like, you know, if you're just going orgasm for orgasm. But this
Right.
is about the fantasy,
Right.
which that you get a lot of mileage out of that.
Yeah.
Like it's still a great fantasy.
Did you tell your boyfriend afterwards? Was he very curious about what ended up happening?
Oh, I'm sure he's heard by this point like way more than you ever wanted to know. But yeah, and it was also like a story that we would tell, like after it happened at somebody's birthday or whatever.
I know on podcasts like this.
Yeah, and he read the essay. So like he's heard a ton of it. But some people that I talk to on my show are like, "Oh, they're swingers or they're polyamorous or whatever, and they love the pillow talk part of it, right? They love talking about each other doing these things, and that wasn't part of it for us. To me, I was just like, "Oh, it's so sexy that, we're just good like that." That was what was hot about it.
Yeah. Where did where does this curiosity and interest in sexuality and being so upfront about it and public about it, you know, part of your career and part of your professional life? And you're also, it's funny because there's like this dichotomy between you're very open about talking about sex and exploring sex, and yet you're kind of conservative, like you said, in your like, you're in a monogamous relationship. I wouldn't say conservative. I don't know. Maybe that's not the right word, but maybe more traditional.
Vanilla.
Vanilla, Minnesota. You can take the girl out of Minnesota.
Oh, come on.
I'm just kidding. But you know what I mean? Like, so where did this interest come from, do you think?
First of all, people in Minnesota are like, cheating on their husbands, and
Yeah.
they're also getting their rocks off, so don't even worry about them.
Okay.
It's not as vanilla as you think.
Yeah.
Um, I don't know. I'm just curious about lots of different things, and sexuality has always been one of them. And I think it's like probably a little bit of the taboo part of it. It's like the things that you're not supposed to talk about or whatever are way more interesting. Um, yeah. It's been, I've been covering this for a long time, so it's almost lost some of its, I wouldn't say lost, but I've tried to I've tilled a lot of ground. So, you know, it's interesting to find new things that are like this happy ending thing was like totally unexpected and like a totally new territory for me to explore, even though I'd covered a lot of other things in the space.
Well, first of all, in Japan, did you get the impression that's a pretty common service, or were you sort of in the underground there?
They have a really interesting culture where, we have so much shame tied up in our sexuality because of religion, and they don't really have that.
Hmm.
Um, so they're a little freer in that regard, but the societal um constriction of like what it's supposed to look like, what your life is supposed to look like, and what you can be out about is very limited. So it does feel like, in a lot of ways they live these double lives, or many people do. Um, and I would say even gender equality is not as far along there as it is here, but yet on the sexual side, I would say women almost do have more agency or opportunities, or like um and there's a lot of opportunity for women sex workers, which you can't be out about it, but you can live this double life in a way that totally works for people, and they make a ton of money. So I don't know, it's interesting because
Yeah, it's a dichotomy that it's hard to understand. I remember my cousin who lived in Japan when I was there, and who had lived in Japan for, I think she lived there for like 50 years. Um, she said, this is a country where somebody will go over, like if they don't get your tea right, like serve your tea in the correct way, they'll be just like embarrassed, and like, lots of, apologies and that kind of thing. And yet you could stand next to that same person on a subway and they're reading the most pornographic magazine you've ever seen in your life.
yeah.
And it's fine. Like there's nothing weird about that. And I just think that that is an interesting, that was like to put it that way. I thought she's totally right. Like that was something I noticed as well.
It's
Uh,
definitely a place like I need way more than a week to understand completely what's going on there. I'm fascinated by
what,
the culture. I would love to go back.
what were in your in your travels for private parts unknown? What were some other interesting sort of observations you made from other countries? Did you have any other experiences quite at the level of getting a happy ending massage?
Well, that was definitely the most experiential kind of, but we went to Belize. We actually never aired these episodes. I think I probably will in the future, but we went to Belize right after the pandemic, and it had sort of just opened back up, and I didn't realize the amount of poverty that was in Belize City. It was just a humbling trip because they're also such a grateful people just as a whole. I would say everyone we encountered, there was like one of our chefs said something repeatedly that we heard other people say too, and he would just be like strong and blessed, strong and blessed. That was like his like morning mantra. And other people had, kind of phrases of gratitude that they would say too. And it's like they're so grateful for these lives that, they have way less access to things than we do, and they're much more simple, and it was beautiful to see that kind of gratitude. And it was humbling for me to like, we'd been on these other trips that were a little bit more cosmopolitan in the destinations that we were going, and like, we had kind of a hard trip in. That's very relative. But anyway, and I remember saying like, "Oh, if they don't have mezcal margaritas in Belize City, like I'm gonna throw a fit." Meh. And then
Right.
we went into Belize City and we saw what Belize City looked like, and I was like, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I take that back a million times. Like these people are just trying to get through, they're happy with, then we wound up going to this place and it was like, oh, you have well vodka, amazing.
Right.
Like
It didn't
it's,
matter.
yeah, it doesn't matter. So that one was
Why did you
just
choose? But no, you chose Belize specifically for private parts unknown. Like, what did you end up, what kind of shows did you end up doing there?
We had some really amazing guests. We talked to Caleb, I believe it's Orzo is his last name. And this man endured so much crazy shit coming out against, they had these anti-sodomy laws on the books. And it was just really intense to be gay there for a long time, and still kind of is, but it's much better thanks to him and all of his activism and like putting himself through these court cases. And so he's really been kind of a game-changing figure in the region as a whole. And we got to talk to him, and um he's such a delightful character. And another person that's like very grateful, even though it's like, his sister has cancer and he is going through it too. It's like there's so much that's going on that's hard, and still so much gratitude. And then we talked to this woman who is in the Belize City area, and she has a sex toy. She sells sex toys, but she didn't even know if it was legal, when she started doing it. It's like a very conservative,
Yeah.
religious place. And she had to ask around and be like, can I do this? And I think technically she can, but it's like very, it's like she's getting DMs on WhatsApp and, like it's not a storefront kind of situation. But she's very passionate about, wanting to encourage these conversations, which are really not just about pleasure. Pleasure is very important, but it's also getting people, especially women, the education that they need to have control over their bodies and like whether or not they have babies and things like that. So, yeah. And we wound up going tubing, through this rainforest, and Juan was our guide just randomly. And he was the best. He was like, what I think of as like a quintessential Belizean man, but being a tour guide is like it's like a good job to have there. And he was so nice, and also tried to fuck us. But Sophia, my co-host, lost her phone in the these like springs, these rainforest springs, and we did not think we were going to get it back. And this man dove and dove and dove and finally got it. So he was such a hero. But he also just gave us a great interview and gave us his perspective. He's never been able to talk about sex with women. It's like a very topic that you're not allowed to talk about. And he told us about cheating escapades and like a whole bunch of personal stuff. So we really get to connect with people on this crazy intimate level during these trips, and that's kind of the best part of it.
Yeah, I mean, I guess sex is kind of a universal language. Like, we all have it, but
Yeah.
we talk about it in different ways. It's kind of like music, right?
Yeah.
It's expressed in different ways. Are you talking, and I will take this out of the podcast, are you talking about the thing you told me about OnlyFans publicly, or was that just between me and you?
Oh, that I do. I would love to promote my
Okay. Can I
OnlyFans. Are
talk?
you giving me an
So,
opportunity? Yes.
yeah. So I was really interested. We were talking, and you mentioned to me that you had started an OnlyFans account. And
Yeah.
I don't know too many writers who have started who have started OnlyFans accounts. And so I was just so interested to hear about that journey for you, why you chose to do it. Tell me a little bit about what it is and why you chose to do it.
Well, I also started it for research, like you
Well, I was
do.
thinking this is a great topic. It's kind of like
I do want to write a book about it.
yeah,
Yeah, just about like the rise of it, and it does change sex work. But anyway, I started because there were a lot of other comedian kind of people that had started accounts during the pandemic, and it looked kind of fun. I'm an exhibitionist. I've always wanted to pose for Playboy. Like
Right.
I love doing photo shoots so much. It's like such a thrill for me. So I was like, this is very much my thing. And we did a series for the podcast Comedians of OnlyFans. And it was like we interviewed like one person, and then I took a little trip between recordings. And by the time I came back, I like had my own OnlyFans, and I was like also an OnlyFans creator. But it's been amazing,
For those who
I
don't
read
understand what OnlyFans is, maybe there's some people out there. OnlyFans is
if you're living
explain what
under
it
a
is.
rock.
Yeah, if you're living under a rock, explain what it is.
It's like Patreon. It's like a subscription membership platform, and a lot of sex workers use it for adult content. Um, in that sort of realm, my OnlyFans is very tame. It's just like Playboy style pics, but
Are you
what
nude?
it
Do you
does
mind if I
is
ask if
cut
you're
out.
nude? I'm definitely not going to subscribe. I think that would be an invasion of your privacy. But are you nude?
You know what? Yes, I'm nude. I don't do a lot. It's not like you're really like you can see my pussy or anything like that, but you can see my boobs.
Okay. Okay.
Um,
And yet you're totally fine with that. Like, don't have any issues with
yeah,
that.
it started because first I just want to
Sorry.
the beautiful thing about OnlyFans, just while we're explaining what it is that it kind of cuts out the middleman.
Mm.
So you can have this direct relationship, monetary relationship with your fans without needing to have somebody else shoot your content or whatever, which is um I think really important when you're talking about this kind of work. So, anyway, this started actually another huge motivating thing was for Black Lives Matter. I was doing a thing, this was like shortly after George Floyd. And I was like, okay, if you donate $25 or whatever you donate um, to Black Lives Matter and you send me the receipt, I will send you like a topless pic or whatever. So I was doing that, and I wound up like I tracked it all in a spreadsheet, and there was like $33,000 of donations or something crazy like that. And I was like, oh, wow. It was a whole administrative job to like make sure everyone got their photos.
Wow.
And it was some people that I knew, right, would message me and I would send them photos. So I really don't, and I didn't care. It was fine. And I have had like this realtor that I know
Yeah.
subscribe to
I
my
think people
thing.
don't know that when you subscribe, like you're gonna know.
No,
Right.
I think he told me.
Oh, he tell you? Because I would imagine like it would
Everybody
come
has to
name
tell
it.
me. Yeah.
So what was that like? Your realtor suddenly like knows what you look like naked.
Yeah, it was just like a friend of the family. I was flattered. I mean, it wasn't that weird. It
Yeah, okay.
was I kind of like knowing that some people are just like a little freaky. Just want to
Yeah.
know.
So I don't want to bury the lead here. So you do, I'm sure you do tasteful nude photo shoots. You're pretty arty, so I imagine that you think about they're sort of artistic.
I like to have them be like photo shoots.
Yeah,
Like
like real.
I have some candid stuff that I just take sometimes. Some people like that more, which I'm like, what's wrong with you? But I like to, for me, it's a little bit of, it's like, how do you maintain your sexuality and your like desire for newness within the confines of a monogamous relationship, which I want. And for me, this is like a really great outlet of me feeling like, oh, these people think I'm hot. I feel hot when I do the photo shoots. So like that's what I get out of it. And then I also get money. So I also feel like I've in some ways been paid for like s- you know, unwelcome sexual harassment that I've endured in my life. I
Mm,
just feel like there's a nice kind of like the money's shaken out a little better than it
yeah,
usually does.
right. And as you said, there's no middleman that's kind of taking advantage of you or exploiting you. This you're completely in control of this.
Yeah. OnlyFans just takes 20%,
Right. And
which is a lot.
it's a lot, but you told me you're doing pretty well.
Well, so I went on this podcast that's quite popular, and it seemed appropriate to plug my OnlyFans, and it was really a good call because then there was a client that got dropped after that, so it was like perfect timing. But I made a buttload of money on on
Like
that.
5
I am
figures.
in the top 3.5% of OnlyFans creators right now. I would like to maintain it. So hey, if you are listening and you want to
Yeah, if you
subscribe
want to subscribe,
to Coco
Nope.
Peep Show on OnlyFans, please
Coco
do.
Peep Show.
Oh yes.
Oh my goodness.
Ah.
So this is you see, I told this would be fascinating. We met, you throw these great events. You're very good at linking people up. You're a good networker.
Thank you. I
Uh,
think that's I like that skill in other people.
yeah, it's a great skill. And you started telling me some of these stories. I was like, you got to come on my podcast. So what are you excited about? We just talked about OnlyFans. What are you excited about writing in sort of the sex world right now? Sorry to keep it. I'm just focusing on that in this interview.
Well, no, that is a lot of what I write.
Doing,
I
yeah.
have been working on for a long time. I can't even say the oldest essay's probably 10 years old, but I'm working on this coming of age memoir and essays that I've been working on forever. That's kind of always in the background, but even that has some sex stuff in it. And I just actually got an agent. Do you know this?
No, I don't know that. That's exciting. Congratulations.
Thank you. So, Mark Gottlieb from Trident Media Group. Do you know Trident? It's actually
I'm sure
a
they're great.
very good agency.
That's amazing.
This agent is like better than I could have possibly dreamed for myself. I never would have queried him, but I went to a webinar that he was giving, and we just had a chance to like introduce ourselves, and I got a good vibe. So anyway, it wound up working out. And so I'm very excited because I've had these book proposal things that I've been working on. One that's kind of based on the podcast Sex Around the World in 80 Days, and something else that's top secret and I can't talk about. But I'm very excited to have someone, who it's like motivating to
It's hard to do it for
we're ready, but now to get them polished, it's very motivating because it's like, oh, he can do something with them like right away.
So he's going to get some of those proposals out into the world.
Yes.
These are
Definitely.
nonfiction books, right?
Nonfiction books. Yes.
Yeah. That's exciting. Well, congratulations on that. So
Thank you.
what are you seeing, since you sort of have your ear to the ground here in the world of sex? What are you seeing now that's different?
I think that's overselling my.
Well, you do, but you listen and you're curious, like you say, very curious.
Yes.
I'm not
I
saying
report
you
on
don't
it for
partake.
sure.
Yeah, you don't partake in everything. Is there anything you're seeing now that is different now than it was 10 years ago? Like, is there anything about sex that you feel like that's changed?
Oh, I think it's a totally different conversation. I don't know. I think the way the amount of people that are considering open relationships or just relationships that don't look like the heteronormative standard, I think that's a huge number. Obviously, people are exploring gender identity in ways that they didn't feel like they could in the past. This isn't necessarily a super new thing, but in LA, sex workers are trying to unionize. Actually all over the world. That's happening in like Thailand and Brazil as well. So there's a lot of interesting stuff going on. I think the conversation, well, it's like back and forth, right? It's also the abortion stuff. It's like as we become more free in one way, we're becoming more restricted. There's pushback. There's like these abortion bans, and in some states they're trying to go back to like when sex toys were illegal and things like that. That's crazy pushback, but I think we're trending towards sex positivity.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of the things that are happening now definitely skipped my generation. I think I'm like 10 or 15 years older than you, probably 15 years older than you, probably 20. Anyway, but the point is that like you probably know a lot more people that have sort of are in open relationships or polyamorous relationships. I feel like that is something that is more of a kind of millennial Gen Z thing than it was a Gen X thing.
Yeah, and I think it's probably even more Gen Z than millennial. It's like, at the beginning of my adulthood and when I started dating, all that stuff then was way more heteronormative and um no one was talking about open relationships in the same way. And by now, as I'm approaching my 40s, um
Goodness.
that's a totally different conversation,
Yeah. Well, okay. This is the part where we promote what you got going on. We've been talking a lot about Private Parts Unknown. You also have a really great podcast called The Bleeders about writing and interesting conversations with writers. You also have a third podcast called
Podcast Bestie, the podcast. So I started this newsletter a couple years ago now, almost 2 years ago. And it was about podcasting because I'm clearly addicted to making podcasts. I've also produced that before I quit my jobs. I was a podcast producer for like celebrities and CEO shows. I did several of those. And so anyway, I have this expertise and I wanted to bring it to indie podcasters because I love folks like us that are just out there trying to make our shows and like leverage it to build brands and stuff like that. So that's what I'm trying to talk about with Podcast Bestie, both the newsletter on Substack and now the podcast, which is number 3 on the how-to charts
That's
today.
amazing. I was going to ask you, what of your podcasts is the most listened to at this point?
Private Parts Unknown, but that's just because it's much more established.
Yeah.
But
Podcast Bessie's making a run.
Podcast Bestie's making a run. That's just episode number 4.
Wow, that's amazing.
Episode number 3 already has like 2,500 downloads. It's only been out, a little over 10 days. It's pretty good.
That's really, really great. How do you come up with your podcast ideas? Is it just, this is what I'm interested in, or are you kind of looking at the market, or is it just like you're just following your interests?
Oh, I think you have to follow your interests because it's so much work. It's so much work. You don't want to waste your time on something you don't actually love.
Agree. Well, you do so many great things. And if people want to find out about you, what's the best way to follow you?
Well, if you're a freak, you need to follow Coco Peep Show on OnlyFans. But if you are a little more, vanilla or interested in my civilian work, follow me at Courtney Kocak. My last name is Kocak. I am on Twitter and Instagram. One of these days I'm gonna make some videos for TikTok, but
I know. Yet another thing that takes work, and is it really worth it?
oh, I know.
Something I think about all the time, but I don't look as good as you. All right, Courtney, always a pleasure. Excited about our next dinner together.
Yes.
Thank you for doing the podcast.
Thank you for having me. This was